Twilight enveloped the city in a dark veil, and the deserted streets seemed to maintain a heavy silence. Monsieur Antoine Delacroix, General-in-Chief of the police, advanced at a leisurely pace, his imposing silhouette cutting through the heavy night air. He was a man respected for his integrity, but also feared for his determination to eradicate the corruption that infected the ranks of the police. Delacroix was an emblematic figure, a pillar of justice, but he also carried with him the burden of being one of the rare black people to have reached this rank in a system corrupted by prejudice. Alongside him walked Hector, his faithful German shepherd. Always on the lookout, the dog followed him like his shadow, vigilant and protective. Delacroix and Hector formed an inseparable duo. One represented authority and justice, the other loyalty and strength. That evening, they were returning from a long day of work. Delacroix, although tired, seemed serene, enjoying this moment of respite in the company of his dog. Suddenly, a loud noise rang out in the cool night air. Behind them, hidden in the shadows, Agent Philippe Durand waited patiently, his weapon in hand. Durand, a white police officer with a past tainted by numerous accusations of racism and abuse of power, harbored a deep hatred for Delacroix. He saw him as an obstacle, a man who he believed should never have reached this prestigious position simply because of the color of his skin. It was this hatred, visceral and irrational, that had pushed him to commit the irreparable. Delacroix suspected nothing. His thoughts drifted to the challenges he would still face, while Durand's figure approached, driven by blind rage. The time had come for him to act. His fingers gripped the trigger with determination. A gunshot rang out, shattering the calm of the night. General Delacroix's body collapsed to the ground, without a word, before Hector's horrified eyes. The dog began to bark furiously, his panic rising to a crescendo as he desperately tried to protect his master, without understanding what had just happened. Hector lay down next to Delacroix's body, sniffing and moaning, trying to wake up the one who had always been at his side. Durand, frozen, contemplated his work. His weapon still smoking in his hand, he looked at Delacroix's body without any remorse, convinced that he had restored order to what he believed to be an unbalanced world. But Hector, loyal and determined, was not ready to give up. As Durand walked away into the shadows, the dog, full of rage and sorrow, remained at his master's side, silently swearing to never let this vile act go unpunished. 2 months had passed since that fateful night when General Antoine Delacroix was shot dead in the street. 2 months of silence, mourning, and unsatisfied anger. Despite official investigations, city tributes, and media reports, something remained deeply broken in the hearts of those who knew and respected the man. The police, corrupted by opposing factions, were unable to unite to deliver justice. And in the midst of it all, a faithful German shepherd continued to watch, unchanging. Hector remained there, day after day, stationed in front of Delacroix's tomb, refusing to leave his master. Neither the family's attempts nor the appeals of his former colleagues could distract the animal from its silent mission. Under the gray autumn sky approaching, the dog continued to wait, perhaps hoping that his master would rise from the earth. The cemetery, shrouded in mist, seemed almost deserted, with the exception of the German shepherd whose unwavering loyalty marked each visitor. A light mist enveloped the cemetery at the end of the autumn day. The dead leaves crunched under the boots of the 2 police officers who patrolled around the graves. Inspector Laurent and his young colleague, Sergeant Dubois, walked in silence, their breath condensing in the cold air. "This isn't your usual round, is it?" murmured Dubois, a nervous smile on his lips. Laurent shrugged his shoulders. "We were asked to take a tour here." Apparently, the cemetery caretaker noticed some unusual things. Noises, shadows. "It's probably just a question of superstition." Suddenly, Dubois stopped short. "Inspector, look over there." He pointed to a dark figure crouching near a grave about 30 meters from them. Laurent narrowed his eyes and saw a large black dog, sitting with strange dignity, on the grave of the former chief general of the police, Commissioner Delacroix. The beast had shiny fur and seemed to be observing the tombstone with disturbing intensity. "What is this guy doing here?" murmured Laurent, perplexed. I've never seen a stray dog around here. They approached slowly, afraid of scaring him or worse, being attacked. But the dog didn't move. He remained perfectly still, his golden eyes fixed on the stone where the dates of Delacroix's birth and death were engraved, as well as this inscription: to serve and protect until the last hour. Dubois shivered. It's almost like he's standing guard. Laurent nodded, observing the details of the animal. There was no leash, no collar. However, the dog gave off an impression of strength and nobility. "Do you know the story of Commissioner Delacroix?" asked Laurent in a lower voice, as if the cemetery imposed a sort of silent respect on him.
Dubois shook his head.
A remarkable man. He put an end to so much crime and gangs in the city. But he was not alone. He had a dog, a Rottweiler named Hector. The dog was said to have saved him many times, sniffing out ambushes and protecting his master. Hector died a few months before the commissioner, and Delacroix never recovered. Laurent paused. Locals say that when Delacroix died, a black dog, identical to Hector, appeared here, on his grave. Dubois swallowed with difficulty. "You mean it's the same dog? But it's impossible. Hector died years ago." Laurent's gaze did not leave the dog, who almost seemed to be listening to their conversation. He whispered, "Maybe. Or maybe it's just a stray dog." But before he could finish his sentence, the dog turned his head towards them, his eyes catching the light of the rising moon. He stared at them for a moment, as if gauging their presence, then slowly stood up. He didn't bark or growl. With a majestic gait, he advanced towards the police officers, crossing the cemetery with an almost unreal grace. Laurent and Dubois froze, their police instincts screaming at them to back off. But something inexplicable prevented them from moving. It was as if this dog, this entity, was bewitching them, plunging them into a state of total stupor. Dubois' heartbeat sounded like a frenzied tambourine, and he felt a cold sweat running down the back of his neck. "Inspector," he breathed, his voice trembling. Laurent did not answer. His eyes were glued to the animal, which was getting closer and closer. With each step the dog took, the fog seemed to thicken. The silence became more oppressive. Finally, the dog stopped a few meters from them, his gaze piercing. His eyes shone with a supernatural brilliance, like two golden jewels animated with an almost human intelligence. Then, in a slow movement, he lowered his head and stepped back slightly. It was an invitation, a strange sign of submission that contrasted with the imposing aura he exuded moments earlier. He turned around and began walking toward the back of the cemetery, occasionally glancing back, as if to make sure the two police officers were following him. Laurent came to his senses first. "Come on, let's follow him." His voice was no longer as confident. He didn't know what compelled him to follow this dog, but an inexplicable intuition told him that they had to do it. Dubois hesitated, but ended up following his superior's lead. They walked like this for what seemed like an eternity, passing rows of forgotten graves, some half buried under the weeds. The mist rose in swirls, creating strange and sinister shapes that danced around them. The dog guided them to an old ruined chapel, hidden by overgrown vegetation. Its walls were cracked, and the roof was collapsing in places, letting the silver rays of the moon filter through. The dog stopped in front of the entrance to the chapel, turning towards them again. His eyes stared at them intently, as if he was trying to communicate something to them. "What does he want?" whispered Dubois, his hands trembling. Laurent did not answer immediately. He approached the chapel, and when he crossed the threshold, a smell of damp earth and moldy wood assaulted his nostrils. The dog walked inside and stopped in the center of the room, staring at a specific point on the floor. Laurent took out his flashlight and swept the floor with a beam of light. There he saw a wooden trapdoor, covered in dust and dead leaves. "That's what he wanted to show us," he murmured, half to himself. Dubois, standing cautiously behind him, nodded. "But why?" As if to answer this question, the dog gave a slight growl, turning towards them. Laurent felt his courage strengthen. He leaned down and pulled on the rusty trapdoor handle. After some effort, the lid gave way with an eerie crack, revealing a narrow staircase that descended into the depths of the earth. An icy breath, full of dust and mystery, rose from the darkness. Du Bois swallowed loudly. "Detective, I'm not sure this is a good idea." But Laurent, as if spellbound, placed one foot on the first step. "Something tells me we have to go down." The dog, sitting near the trapdoor, watched them calmly. Then, in an unexpected move, he got up and walked down the steps, plunging into the darkness. Laurent glanced at Du Bois, whose face was pale. "Come on, have courage. Here we go." They descended carefully, their flashlights lighting the way. The walls were covered in ancient carvings, symbols they could not decipher. The air was getting colder and stifling. They finally reached a small underground room. In the center of the room was a wooden chest, decorated with intricate designs. The dog sat next to the trunk, waiting patiently. Du Bois approached, his trembling fingers resting on the lid. "Open it," Laurent whispered. Du Bois took a deep breath and slowly lifted the lid. Inside, they discovered a collection of strange objects: yellowed photos, medals, an antique pistol, and at the bottom, a sealed letter. Laurent took the letter and opened it delicately. The elegant and familiar handwriting of Commissioner Delacroix appeared before his eyes. Laurent looked over the letter, his heart beating. Delacroix's words held an urgency and gravity he had never seen before. When he finished reading, he looked up at Du Bois, who was still staring at the contents of the chest, stunned. "Inspector, what does this all mean?" Du Bois whispered, his voice echoing strangely in the underground room. Laurent sighed, trying to put his thoughts in order. "That means the commissioner had discovered something bigger than anything we could have imagined. A network of corruption that extended to the highest levels of the police and perhaps even beyond." The dog, still sitting near them, made a little yip, attracting their attention. His eyes shone strangely, and he seemed to point them to another point in the room with a subtle movement of his head. "Wait, there's something else," Laurent said, slowly getting up. He headed towards the place indicated by the dog and, to his great surprise, discovered a second trapdoor hidden under a worm-eaten wooden plank. He leaned down and picked her up carefully. Inside, they found another, smaller, metal chest with an imposing padlock. Du Bois brought the lamp closer, illuminating the chest with a flickering light. "And what is that?" he asked, his throat tight. Laurent searched frantically in the first chest and eventually found a small iron key decorated with an intricate pattern. He slipped it into the padlock and turned it. A sharp click sounded, and the lid slowly opened. Inside was a series of thick files, audio cassettes, and an envelope on which was written in capital letters, "For the Eye of Justice." Laurent took the envelope and opened it carefully. A series of black and white photographs fell out. They showed men in suits, some he immediately recognized as current and former members of the police force. But there were also political figures, businessmen, and even a few judges. "My God," Du Bois murmured, staring at the stern faces in the photos. It's a real network of influence." "Exactly," Laurent agreed. "These men control much more than the police. They have contacts in government, in private companies. It's a large-scale conspiracy." The dog let out a soft whine, bringing their attention back to him. He stood up and headed towards the exit, as if he felt that their mission in this underground room was over. "We can't take all that," Du Bois said, a touch of panic in his voice. "If anyone finds out what we found here, we're dead, Inspector. They have the power to crush anyone." Laurent gritted his teeth. "But we can't leave this here either. This evidence must come to light. Delacroix died for this affair. Hector," he stopped for a moment, looking at the dog with respect. "Hector brought us here to see justice done." After a long silence, Du Bois nodded.
"All right."
"But how are we going to get all this out of here without being spotted?" "We're going to photograph everything, scan what we can, and hide the originals elsewhere," Laurent replied, taking out his cell phone. "If they find the location, at least the copies will be safe." They set to work, taking photos of the documents, recording the tapes, and meticulously listing each piece of evidence. The dog watched silently, his eyes following their every move, as if making sure everything was going well. When they had finished, Laurent carefully closed the chest and the trapdoor. Then they left the underground room. On the surface, the mist had cleared, revealing a clear night sky dotted with twinkling stars. The dog led them silently to the entrance of the cemetery. There he stopped, turning to stare at them one last time. Laurent felt a wave of emotion overwhelm him. "Thank you, Hector," he whispered. The dog tilted its head, its golden eyes shining with a soft, peaceful glow. Then, in one fluid motion, he turned around and disappeared into the darkness, blending into the shadows of the cemetery, as if he had never existed. Dubois and Laurent remained motionless for a long moment, their gazes lost in the direction where the dog had vanished. Then, pulling themselves together, they left the cemetery, their hearts heavy but determined. Laurent and Dubois returned to the police station, the silence weighing heavily between them. The events of the night seemed almost unreal to them, like a bad dream from which they had difficulty waking up. When they arrived in the deserted parking lot, they exchanged a meaningful look. "What do we do now?" Dubois asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Laurent took a deep breath. "We must remain discreet. Until the media reveals everything, we are in danger. They will want to silence us before the affair breaks out." He paused, his eyes fixed on the darkness that surrounded the police station. "Dubois, go see your family. I don't know what's going to happen, but if you want to pull out now, I'll understand." Dubois nodded slowly. "No, Inspector. I can't leave now. Hector and Delacroix, they gave their lives for this truth. We have to go all the way." His words were firm, but Laurent could see the fear in his eyes. They separated shortly after, promising to stay in touch via a secure network they had set up to avoid interception. Laurent spent the night in his office, his mind tormented by the implications of what they had discovered. Every noise, every step in the corridor made him jump, and he didn't manage to fall asleep until a few hours before dawn. The next morning, the scale of the affair was finally revealed. The first news channels were already relaying elements of the scandal: accusations of corruption, embezzlement, evidence of collusion between senior officials and local mafia bosses. But the media only knew part of the story. They had not yet published everything, for fear of reprisals. Laurent checked his secure emails. A coded message from Dubois flashed in his inbox. "They know. They're looking for you. Don't stay at the police station." Laurent felt his heart tighten. He knew this moment would come, but he wasn't ready to give up. He quietly left the police station, using an unmarked car to go to a safe location. In the days that followed, they had to stay on the move, changing hiding places every night. The pressure on them continued to grow. Anonymous calls, threatening messages, and even attempts at physical intimidation followed them everywhere. But despite this, each day allowed the affair to gain momentum. Demonstrations multiplied, demanding independent investigations and the resignation of senior officials. The entire city seemed plunged into a whirlwind of agitation. One evening, while they were hiding in a small suburban apartment lent to them by a former colleague of Delacroix, Laurent received a call from an unknown number. "Inspector Laurent?" asked a feminine voice, tinged with nervousness. "Who's on the phone?" he replied, his senses immediately alert. "I am Claire Delacroix, the commissioner's daughter." Laurent felt his breath catch. He hadn't seen Claire in years, since Delacroix had kept her away from his work for her safety. He remembered her as a bright and lively young woman. "Claire, I'm sorry about what happened to your father," he said softly. "Look, I don't have much time." Her voice was urgent, as if she was hiding from herself. I discovered something in my father's belongings. Something that might be even more important than what you've already found. He had contacts in intelligence services. Trusted people, but they don't yet know that you have taken over the business. I think they can help you." Laurent sat up, adrenaline flooding his veins. "Where are you?" "I'm coming to get you." "No," she exclaimed. "You must remain discreet. I will send you an address."
"Come alone."
"No phones, no trackers." And above all, she stopped hesitant. "Trust no one, even on your own side." The call abruptly ended. Laurent stared at the screen of his phone, his thoughts tangled. Why was Claire contacting him now? What exactly did she know? He shared the information with Du Bois, who was as perplexed as he was, but after a long discussion, they decided to follow his instructions. The next night, they went to the address Claire had sent them. It was an old abandoned warehouse, away from the city. The place was plunged into darkness, and the tension was palpable. Inside, they found Claire, visibly exhausted and on guard. "Thank you for coming," she whispered, welcoming them. "I have something here that could bring down the whole conspiracy." She showed them a USB stick. "This is a secure file. My father had managed to hack the communications of certain members of the network. There are recordings, exchanges of information, and lists of names. With this, you can prove their guilt in a court of law." Laurent took the key, holding it like the precious object that it was. "But why didn't you go straight to the police?" "Because there is a mole in the intelligence services. Someone has already started to cover up the traces of this affair. This is why my father died. He got too close to the truth. I don't trust anyone anymore." Laurent and Du Bois exchanged a look full of gravity. The tension in the air was almost palpable. "We have to be careful," Laurent whispered, keeping his tone calm so as not to scare Claire. "And what do you plan to do now?" Claire took a deep breath. "I'm going to stay hidden. I can't risk being found. But you need to get this information out there as quickly as possible. If what's in this key is as explosive as I think it is, they won't let you do it." Du Bois nodded. "We need a plan. If we take him to court, we will have to protect the evidence and our safety." "Exactly," Laurent agreed. "We'll also have to make sure Claire is safe. You can't stay here alone. I have a friend, a former DGSI agent, who can help us circulate information without attracting attention. He has his own contacts, and he can also arrange protection for Claire," Du Bois offered. "It can work, but you have to go carefully," replied Laurent. He looked at Claire. "You have to trust us, Claire. If what you said is true, we can all take down this network. But we will have to act quickly and be extremely careful." Claire nodded, but worry was evident on her face. "I know I can't trust anyone, but I don't want my father's death to be in vain." The trio got to work. They decided to separate again, to minimize the risks. Du Bois contacted his former colleague while Laurent remained in contact with Claire, reassuring her as much as he could. The next day, Laurent and Du Bois found themselves in a distant cafe, their faithful hideout. "I got my friend," announced Du Bois, looking concerned. "He can meet us tonight." But he warned, "They know we are trying to defend ourselves. They monitor movements around the police station. We have to feint then. It's imperative that we don't leave them any clues," Laurent replied. "We must act as if we were on an ordinary case." When night fell, they headed to the meeting place, a small office outside of town. The atmosphere was tense. Every noise seemed to echo in the darkness. Laurent remembered Claire's words, "Don't trust anyone." Inside the office, they found Du Bois' friend Paul sitting behind a worn wooden desk. His face was marked by years of experience, but he also looked nervous. "Thank you for coming," he began, looking around. "The situation is more serious than expected. I have received information that men are looking for you. They need to know you're alive." Laurent felt a rush of adrenaline invade him. "We must act quickly. What do you suggest?" Paul stood up and walked towards a map on the wall. "This is the place where the meeting will take place. It is an abandoned warehouse outside the city, often used by members of the network. If you can get in there and capture audio or visual evidence, it could be the key to bringing the whole thing down." "We have to be careful," Du Bois interjected. "If the mole is among us, it could be a trap." "I'll make sure Claire is safe," Laurent said, turning to look at her. "If something goes wrong, hide and contact us." Claire nodded, but worry lingered in her eyes. "I don't like the idea of staying here without you." "It's the best thing to do at the moment," Laurent insisted. "We will come back as soon as we have news." The tension was palpable as they left the office and headed towards the warehouse. Laurent drove carefully, his thoughts becoming muddled. What if Paul was the mole? Once there, they parked some distance away and discreetly approached the entrance to the warehouse. Dim light filtered through the cracks in the dilapidated walls. The voices of the network members echoed inside, making them nervous. "We have to enter from the back," Laurent whispered, slipping behind a pile of debris. Du Bois followed him, his heart beating. Inside, the atmosphere was electric. Laurent and Du Bois slipped between the crates, slowly approaching the source of the voices. Members of the network discussed the latest developments regarding their corruption, escaping any form of surveillance. Laurent took a small recorder out of his pocket and began to capture the conversation. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps sounded behind them. Both men froze. A guard approached, scanning the room with a wary gaze. Laurent and Du Bois hid behind a stack of pallets, holding their breath. "I swear they're tracking us," one of the network members said. "We have to act quickly before they get their hands on us." Laurent exchanged a look with Du Bois, his heart racing. They had to act, and quickly. As they were making a decision on the best course of action, a familiar voice sounded outside. "I know you're there, Laurent," shouted Paul. "Show yourself." Laurent's heart stopped. It was a trap. Uniformed men appeared from the shadows, surrounding the warehouse. Laurent and Du Bois looked at each other, realizing that they had been betrayed. They tried to sneak towards an exit, but the guards were already there, blocking their path. "Don't move," ordered one of them, his gun aimed at them. "Why did you do that, Paul?" Laurent asked, his voice betraying his anger and confusion. Paul smiled cruelly. "Because I'm tired of running. You should have remained ignorant. But now you are in danger." Just when Laurent thought all was lost, he remembered the USB key that Claire had given him. She had to be protected at all costs. In an act of desperation, he slipped it into the inside pocket of his jacket, determined not to let the truth slip away. "If they come after us, they will come after you too, Paul," Du Bois hissed. "And everything you've built will crumble." A gunshot suddenly sounded outside. The men in uniform exchanged alarmed glances, and confusion set in. It was Claire, who had just released the rage accumulated inside her. She had a gun in her hand, her look determined. "Let them go, or I'll shoot," she shouted, her voice trembling but firm. Laurent and Du Bois froze, amazed. Claire was there, courageous and ready to fight. In a surge of solidarity, they joined together, arming themselves with courage and preparing to act. "Now," ordered Laurent, taking the lead in the operation. All together, they rushed towards the exit, using the diversion to pass through the armed men. As they ran outside, bullets whizzed around them, but Claire's determination propelled them forward. Once outside, they split up to reach a car parked nearby. Adrenaline pulsed through their veins as Laurent started the car with a bang. "Where are we going?" asked Du Bois, out of breath. "To the press," replied Laurent. "We must expose the truth before they can silence us." Their hearts beat in unison as they sped toward the light of the city, leaving the darkness of betrayal behind. They knew the path would be dangerous, but together they were ready to face any obstacle to bring the truth to light. With the USB drive safe and hope for justice ignited in their hearts, they headed towards their destiny, determined to never give up. As they drove to the press, the atmosphere in the car was electric. Adrenaline pulsed through their veins, but the weight of Paul's betrayal and the impending danger gnawed at them. Claire, still in shock from what she had just experienced, looked out the window, her mind in turmoil. "What are we going to tell the press?" she finally asked, her trembling voice betraying her worry. "We have proof," Laurent replied, keeping his eyes fixed on the road. "If we expose the web of corruption, it could lead to investigations and hopefully arrests. But we will have to be careful. They won't let us do this without a fight." Du Bois nodded, nervous but determined. "What if Paul was in contact with the press? He could try to destroy our credibility." Laurent squeezed the steering wheel. "Then we'll have to be quick. Once we make our voices heard, they will not be able to suppress the story." The city lights were quickly approaching, illuminating their path. Laurent parked in front of a press building, his heart pounding. They knew that what they were about to do would change their lives forever. "Stay together," Laurent whispered as they got out of the car. "We need to go in, lay out the evidence, and make them listen to us." Inside, the atmosphere was chaotic, with journalists running around, cameras trained on them. Laurent went to an editor who seemed to have a little more influence. "Wait, you can't come in here?" exclaimed a security guard, but Laurent was determined. "We have crucial information about a network of corruption plaguing the city. Let us talk to the editor." The guard hesitated, and that was enough to attract the attention of a journalist, Caroline, who had heard their words. She approached, intrigued. "What's going on here?" "We have proof," Laurent insisted, pulling the USB stick out of his jacket. "This could change the course of things." Caroline raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What is this?" "Recordings of a secret meeting, details of corrupt operations," Dubois replied, his hands trembling with excitement. "Show me," she demanded, her gaze piercing. The three of them headed towards Caroline's office, tension rising with each step. Once inside, Laurent inserted the USB key into his computer. The files appeared on the screen, revealing compromising conversations, damning evidence against influential members of the network. "It's amazing," Caroline whispered, her gaze fixed on the screen. "I can't believe what I'm seeing. You have a story here, and I'm going to make sure everyone hears it." But while they were chatting, Laurent received a message on his phone. It was an anonymous text. "You don't know what you're getting yourself into. We know where you are." His heart stopped. "We have to leave now," he said, anxiety in his voice. "They're on us." Caroline nodded. "I have a plan. Follow me." They quickly left the office, Caroline guiding them through the corridors, avoiding curious stares and reporters. Laurent felt the urgency of the situation, the danger approaching. But Claire, at his side, had taken on a new determination. "We will not let this all fade away," she said. "We must fight for the truth." They reached a fire escape and stepped out into the open air. Caroline led them to a car parked at the back of the building.
"Get in," she ordered.
"I'll take you to a safe place. We're going to make the story public." As they drove off, Laurent glanced out the window, seeing the city lights fading behind them. They knew they were about to unleash a storm, but they were willing to do anything to see justice done. "Whatever happens, we're going to stop them," Laurent said, determined. "This network of corruption will not be able to get away with it this time." By fleeing the press, Laurent, Claire, and Dubois felt determined, but also exposed. Caroline led them to a safe house, a small, secure apartment in the heart of the city. Once inside, they sat around a table, the stress palpable. "We need to prepare our strategy for tonight," Caroline said, her look serious. "I will contact my colleagues. We must be ready when we reveal the story. But we also have to protect our backs," added Dubois. "They know we have proof, and they will stop at nothing to silence us." "I'll check my contacts and see if we can get protection," Claire offered, standing up defiantly. Laurent looked at the USB stick on the table. "That's what's crucial. If we lose it, we lose everything." Hours passed as they prepared to release their story. Caroline began writing a hard-hitting article, revealing the names and crimes of those involved in the corruption network. Their evidence would not only expose corruption, but also implicate influential politicians and powerful businesses. As the sun set, Laurent, Claire, and Dubois stood ready to act. The atmosphere was tense, but the determination was palpable. They knew they were going to have to face a storm. Finally, Caroline turned to them. "The article will be published in less than an hour. We need to make sure the media covers the story so that public pressure is maximum." Just as they were getting ready to go out, Laurent's phone vibrated. A message appeared on the screen. "You won't have time to talk."
His heart sank.
"They're coming," he whispered, anguish in his voice. "Quick, let's go out the back," Caroline ordered, her eyes wide. They quickly made their way to the back of the apartment, but as they opened the door, they were confronted by a group of armed men. These were the members of a network sent to eliminate them. "Don't move," shouted one of them, the gun pointed at them. Laurent felt panic rising. "Stand back," he ordered, trying to remain calm. Claire, in a burst of courage, slipped behind Laurent and took out a pistol that she had recovered during the incident at the warehouse. "Don't come any closer," she shouted, her voice trembling but firm. The men exchanged surprised looks. It was their moment. Taking advantage of the distraction, Laurent and Dubois threw themselves at one of the men, disarming the one who had the gun pointed at them. The fight intensified, but they were short-handed. Suddenly, the sound of a siren sounded in the distance. Caroline had alerted the police. The members of the network, realizing that they were trapped, began to flee. Laurent and his team took the opportunity to escape from the rear. In the street, the police arrived in force. The agents, alerted by the screams and the tumult, intervened quickly. "Down," ordered an officer, pointing his gun at the men in the network. The scene that followed was organized chaos, with uniformed police catching members of the network one by one. Sirens sounded, and the tension in the air slowly dissipated as justice took over. Once the situation was under control, Laurent, Claire, and Dubois watched, relieved but still in shock. The members of the network were chained, escorted by agents. "We did it," Claire whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "Yes, but it doesn't stop there," Laurent replied. "We need to make sure they don't get away with it." After a thorough investigation, the network was dismantled and its members sentenced to severe prison terms. Some, due to the seriousness of their crimes, were sentenced to the death penalty, a decision that provoked intense debates in society. Laurent, Claire, and Dubois were applauded as heroes, but they knew their fight was only beginning. They had sparked change, but fighting corruption and injustice would require constant commitment.